make sure we do that. All right. So, last time, remember that we were just starting to discuss some of the challenges that our organisms were facing in order to make this transition to land, right? So we talked about how there's several bonuses to being on land, right? There's less predation, there's less competition, there's a lot of open niches, right? Thanks to this sudden upcropping of woody plants, right? So the evolution of plants on land is really great, but it's very difficult to get up there, right? Most organisms are not well equipped to be up there, right? So we talked largely before this about things like support and structure, right? Being able to hold our heavy bodies on ground and fight gravity, okay? Having to be able to deal with things like lifting and turning our head, which seemed like something kind of surprising to deal with, but we'd always sort of been able to float and move around in three-dimensional space before now. The next thing then that we were dealing with was desiccation or air itself, right? In particular, the first thing we were talking about were our respiratory organs, right? So we had good ones, right? Gills, right? And we said the major issue here was not necessarily that they couldn't exchange oxygen, right? We know, in fact, that air is better for oxygen exchange, right? Water was a pain to deal with. It's viscous, right? It's thick, right? And its oxygen content is generally very poor, okay? But air is dry, okay? Which seems like a silly thing to say out loud, but ultimately is extraordinarily problematic because it desiccates or dries things out when it touches them. So while our gills could in fact exchange the oxygen, it would not last very long before they dried into little pink husks that would be horrifically useless. So we need to alter things so our respiratory organs, and quite frankly any organ, right, ultimately is very protected, and that the air we bring to it can be moisturized, right, or altered so it's not going to damage the respiratory organ by the time it gets there. And that's one of the big keys, right? When you breathe in air, one of the major things you're doing to it is making it pretty wet, right? So you're not going to hurt your lungs when we get the air there. Okay, so we talked about a couple of different ways or pathways that air gets to these now much deeper lungs, okay? The first of which, and this is where we stopped, thank you, Kaylee, at the very beginning, good gracious, just forgetting English altogether now, at the very end of class, was looking at what we call positive pressure, okay, and this positive piece, specifically referring to doing some sort of active or pushing motion over the course of our breathing process. This is also called buccal pumping, right? Because the mouth is the part that's doing the active process here, okay? We said pretty much the main place that we see this is in amphibians. So we can kind of picture like a large bullfrog doing this process, okay? So at the end of class, we followed this four-part process, right? Remember the big key here is the swallowing of the air first into this buccal pouch, right? So our fresh air is here. Okay, and this is the part we can really imagine, right? That large pouch in the frogs or any of sort of our little amphibians, right? Frogs, I feel like always have the most sort of dramatic one we can kind of picture. Okay, while we're storing that fresh air in our buccal or throat pouch, okay, all of the crappy air, okay, that's in the lungs, okay, it's crappy because it's already been used, right? The air that was in the lungs, it's already gone through exchange, right? We brought that oxygen in. It was dispersed through the body, okay, and been exchanged with carbon dioxide. So our green here is going to be our CO2 because I thought this through really well. All right, so this air is the used air. So we're going to get rid of that. Once we expel that, our lungs are now empty. So all of that fresh air that we're storing in that buccal pouch can now be actively swallowed. Okay, so here's our positive pressure. Boom. Right, we're swallowing fresh air into our lungs. For it to be used and dispersed and all of the wonderful things that oxygen does to our bodies. Okay, this is where we left off at the very end of class, which is of course why I wanted to make sure we revisited it. Okay, before we look at the other major type of respiration, were there any questions about this one?
What's cutaneous respiration? Is that just that?
Oops. So cutaneous respiration just means respiration through the skin. So this is non-lung respiration, right? So remember, positive pressure breathing is largely found only in amphibians, right? As well as some other sort of exceptions and unusual creatures. Amphibians, as we'll find when we talk about them in a bit, can use this method. It's very inefficient because they use pretty much all methods, and one of which is also cutaneous or diffusion through the skin. Okay. One of the reasons most, but not all, amphibians tend to be smaller, and they need to be wet all the time, right? Diffusion or cutaneous respiration only works on wet skin. Okay.
If you have something that respires in that way and they get like into like a toxic area, would that just like automatically kill them since they're like kind of already absorbing it?
Yeah, so Kaylee's question is, if you have an organism that's also using its skin to breathe and they end up somewhere that's polluted, is that problematic for them? The answer is absolutely. Right? And because of this, amphibians are particularly vulnerable to pollution because they can breathe it in, right? They can eat it like everybody else, but they can also absorb it very quickly through their skin. All three ways will kill them. So stinks to be an amphibian most of the time. Okay, great questions. Any other questions about breathing? And of course, we'll retouch base about amphibians in general, okay? But largely about the respiration right now. We love us some frogs. And remember, if you're online, I cannot see the chat, so you do not need your camera on, just pop your mic on to ask a question, then you can turn it back off for me. Okay, let's compare this to the other type of breathing, right, which is the opposite. So we just did positive pressure or active breathing. So this is negative pressure breathing. So this is what most other groups are going to use, reptiles and mammals. Okay, we're going to find with birds, they're going to do a mix of negative and positive. So we're just going to kind of ignore them for right now. So negative pressure breathing, okay, or non-active breathing, okay, the key here is we're going to use pressure gradients. to make this work. Okay, so air is always going to flow down, okay, to the space of lowest pressure. All right, so let's make everybody uncomfortable and spend the rest of the class period thinking very strongly about how they're breathing, because that's what always inadvertently happens from these conversations, right? This is how we're breathing. We're just largely never thinking about how we're breathing. So this is a multi-step process, right? And you are not thinking about how this is happening most of the time. And that's the key, right? This is non-active breathing, right? So all of this is done in the background, right, from your brain. All right, so your first step, right? The key here is we need our air to come into our lungs. Okay, so that's steps 1 through 3, and if we're going to do that, okay, the goal is we need to make a space in our body that has very low pressure. Okay, so we want the air to flow in. And air is going down pressure gradients, right? Okay, so how are we making low pressure? That's the key here. Okay, so if I'm going to make low pressure, okay, I need non-crowded spaces, which means I need big spaces, right? It's basically going to follow the same rules of all of our sort of diffusion, right, concentration gradient rules that we've learned. And we got to dig all that sort of business up, right? All right, so step 1. Okay, your intercostals and your diaphragm contract. That basically means all of the stuff in your chest, okay, the muscles and stuff, contract. Okay, so all of the little muscles between your ribs contract, okay, which means your rib cage is going to lift up, right? You squish your ribs together, lifts your rib cage up, okay? And if your diaphragm contracts, that pulls down, okay? So even though we're contracting muscles, actually makes your rib cage bigger, right? Because you're pulling it up and away from the inside of your thoracic cavity. Okay, so when I pull my rib cage together and pull it up, this actually makes my chest expand. Okay, so I pull my rib cage up and away from my thoracic cavity. I pull my ribs together up and away. All right, so I'm making a slightly bigger chest. Okay, so remember, if we think about step 2, big space, low pressure. Okay, so remember the key here is if we're flowing down a pressure gradient, okay, now that I've made a big space inside my body, okay, and the air molecules, okay, are not crowded in here. Okay, so we've got lots of space inside compared to outside. Right, so I've decreased the pressure inside my body. So naturally, if I'm low pressure inside, right, air is going to flow to my low pressure, right? We're just following pressure gradients. Everybody wants equal space. So we're going to flow to the low pressure area, which in this case, right, is inside. And that's what we want, right? We want the fresh air flowing inside my body. And your nasobuccal pharynx, right? Naso just means nose, right? I can bring air through my nose. Or my buccal, right? That's my mouth. So air can go in either place, okay? Ultimately to get into, right, my chest cavity or my lungs. Okay, so we're just ignoring steps 4 through 6 right now. The key is, do we understand steps 1 through 3? Okay, so we made a big space, lots of room, so air wants to follow down to where there's more room. And so we can all kind of picture that. Now we can all overthink that. Think about how we're breathing in. All right, I lack some space, so I'm going to clear my slide a little bit here so we can look at the second half of this. Nope, I'm erasing. You're rude. Okay, so if we look at, I can leave that, I guess. Change colors here. If we look at the second half of this, I've already got air in. Okay, we would use that air then, distribute it around, yay, fresh oxygen, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now the whole goal is we now got to get that back out, right? So we could circle this. So the second half of these then are looking at how do we get the air back out of my chest and lungs. Okay, so ultimately these last three are just reversing the process we just looked at. Okay, so step 4 is saying our intercostals, right, the muscles between my ribs and my diaphragm are going to relax. Okay, so again, if we think about the muscles that are between my ribs, okay, if I relax those, right, that's going to drop my rib cage back down. Okay, if I drop my rib cage back down onto my thoracic cavity, right, I'm going to squish. It's like closing the doors on a bird cage. Whoop. Okay, so we're contracting or squishing, right, that chest space, our lungs again. Okay, we're increasing that pressure. Okay, now all of the air molecules that are sitting in my chest are elbowing each other, right, pushing each other around. Get out of my face. Okay, there's too many of them in there. Okay, lots of pressure in here. Okay, there's only one option to fix it. Okay, the air now used wants to flow back out. Get away from that crowded room. Okay, so the key here is a multi-step process, and like any of our concentration gradient rules, right, in this case, air molecules, but any molecule, right, largely wants to move towards the least crowded space. Right, that's our goal. And in this case, we can change the shape of our chest cavity to either make our chest the least crowded space or the most crowded space to force the air in or force the air out. Okay, so steps 1 through 3 are forcing that air in, right, because we're making our chest the least crowded space. In steps 4 through 6, we're forcing the air out because we're making our chest the most crowded space. And now we're all keenly aware of our lungs.
Dr. Arnett,
Yes, ma'am.
do you want us to be as specific in saying that it goes in as O2 and it comes out as CO2?
So, understanding that the key is bringing fresh air in and old air out is good.
Okay.
Right, and we will revisit these a whole bunch of times. So right now my big key is just understanding, right, the process. So what is the order that we're doing things in? How are we getting air movement? Great question. Okay. Any other questions about how negative pressure breathing works, okay, or negative pressure breathing compared to positive pressure breathing? Has everybody gotten a chance to get what they need off the slide? So now we've had to draw, erase, and then draw again, and that can be kind of overwhelming. Everybody feel okay? Okay. Any questions about respiration in general before we move on to its sister, right, which is circulation? All right. So one of our main goals then up to this stage has been talking about how do we bring oxygen into the body and do so without destroying our respiratory organs. Okay. So we've seen there's a couple of ways we can do it, but the key is that the organ has to be in our body, which also means that we have to change how we're also bringing, in this case, air, but whatever type of material across or into that respiratory organ as well. We're going to find then that how we're circulating, ultimately that oxygen is going to have to change as well, right? Because our heart is also going to be dealing with gravity, and it's going to have to do a lot more work as well. Okay. So gravity works horrible things inside your body just as much as it has done outside, right? So while we had to worry about things like bones and skeletal structure and head movement to help our bodies lift and be able to work with the outside world, right? The inside of our body is dealing with the same sorts of issues, right? Some of which are intuitive, right? We know, for example, that blood likes to pool. This is one of the issues we humans even deal with, for example, when we're flying for long periods of time. We have to worry about blood pooling in our ankles and our calves, right? Particularly the older we get, right? We get these nice, very cute socks that help these sorts of things from happening. Not that I have to worry about those things. Okay, but this is problematic, okay? And this is problematic for all organisms. Okay, how do we make sure that when I pump blood around my body, it's not just going to go somewhere and never come back, right? And then I die of a horrific aneurysm, or that spot just stays anoxic, right, without oxygen, because the oxygenated blood went there, took carbon dioxide, and then just sat there forever. Okay, it sucks to be that part of the body. So we have to deal with that. And the main way we need to deal with that is higher and higher blood pressure to make sure we keep shoving that blood along, right? We need to keep moving forward. Okay, in addition, we need to also keep that heart healthy, right? We need a bigger, stronger heart to move things along. We're also going to need to oxygenate that heart, right? Give it energy and give it oxygen, which is not something we've really had to worry about before. But fish hearts are little, right? You guys made a bunch of jokes about them in lab pretty much endlessly because they're small and sad, but they didn't need to be big, right? When you're moving stuff around in a floating three-dimensional fluid space, it just kind of goes. There we go. So we've got a couple of systems that help us deal with this. And this stuff probably feels a little more intuitive, partly because the way our stuff works. So a couple of additional beefed up features. Okay, so first of which is that our heart can pump into specialized ooh, you rude. Specialized vessels called arteries. Okay? And these are much thicker on land. All right? And elastic. So the heart can pump more strongly. Okay, so arteries go wow. Arteries away from the heart. All right, so arteries differ from other vessels because they're very, very elastic. Okay, they have collagen and other fibers that allow them to stretch a little bit like a rubber band as the heart pumps really high pressure fluid into them, okay, to make sure that fluid is going to go the distance. Okay, so our arteries are quite thick and quite strong, right, to allow our very strong blood pressure to go very, very far, right, all the way to the tippy tip of your toes, and somehow still come back. Okay, the actual sites of diffusion can't happen at an artery then, right? We just said those were super thick and super rubbery. Too thick for exchange to occur. So we have separate vessel beds for that called capillaries. Okay, your blood is going to slow down significantly here. Okay, these are all like one cell wall thick. Okay, they're spread out quite significantly over whatever tissue layer, right? Say the muscles, right, in your thigh, right, the ligaments in your knee, whatever it is, okay, you're going to get basically a network of single-celled capillaries that allow for this diffusion to occur. Right, and that looks very similar to the countercurrent exchange we saw before. Right, they're giving oxygen, taking away carbon dioxide, and a series of other gross stuff we don't want to leave there. All right, once we leave those capillaries, we now have crappy blood, right, filled with carbon dioxide and all that other junk we don't want. But now we're in a vein. Okay, I like to think veins head in to the heart. Okay, veins are much thinner. Okay, we don't need thick rubber, elasticy business, right? Because we're coming off of the capillaries. Okay, we've lost a lot of that hardcore pressure. Okay, and we're basically kept moving forward because the movement from the arteries as it's going to the capillaries is going to keep, it's like traffic, right? It's going to keep moving you because it's pushing you from behind. Okay, we are much slower. We are low pressure. Okay, this is why it's not a big deal. If you get a cut at a vein, it kind of oozes, it's going slow, or if you care, you're bleeding, that's sad. Okay, but you're not going to bleed out very quickly. It's slow. Okay. We're keeping backflow going. We have a bunch of doors and valves that keep this from going backwards. Okay. And the key here is this is just going to keep us moving forward in till we get back to the heart. All right, so this is one piece. Okay, we have a series of, I'm just going to let that happen. We have a series of diverse vessels. That's a very loud cart. That are going to allow us to start to tackle higher blood pressure and being able to maneuver things around the organism's bodies a little bit better. The other thing we're going to have or add is called the dual circuit system. Okay, so in our fishes, okay, we just had a single circuit system. Okay, blood left the heart. Okay, it went to the gills, it went to the body, then it went to the head, and back to the heart. Okay, didn't have to worry about it. Right, things were chill, not terribly problematic. Remember, we didn't have to worry about things like gravity, okay, speed of the blood, or any of that kind of business. Okay, but now we do. So we have to add a much more efficient, and this is the key here. Okay, this method of blood delivery is significantly more efficient. Okay, so we don't have to worry about our blood slowing down, losing speed, or losing oxygen before it gets to some really key parts of our body. Okay, so dual circuit literally meaning two loops. Okay, and it's really a double loop. So I don't even really like the way it's named. Okay, so I have them laid out nicely in our blue box. Okay, so we're going to draw these out on here. So circuit 1, okay, goes from just the heart to the lungs. Okay, this allows us to maintain good blood pressure. So we can have a lighter blood pressure. We have one part of our heart dedicated to just going like the 3 inches to our lungs. Okay, and getting very good oxygenation. Okay, that highly oxygenated blood then is coming right back to the heart. Come to mama, there we go. Where the much larger part of the heart, in pink, can then loop very generally to the body. Okay, this means then we can dedicate much higher blood pressure to getting that very oxygenated blood. Right, so here's one way we're getting increased efficiency. Okay, high pressure and the most O2 we can give this blood, okay, looping to the body, okay, wherever it needs to go. Okay, so that's one really key feature here. And this is something we did not see. Okay, now, there's one other key piece here. The body itself, this circuit, is also busted into 2 pieces. A top half and a bottom half. Okay, so within the pink circuit, we've broken that down into 2 little red circuits. Okay, this allows us to keep that high pressure. Okay, instead of having to lose pressure if I were to go to my feet first and then try to bring that to my head, right? Or to try to go to my head first and bring that to my feet, right? Either way, I'm going to lose pressure by the time I get from one to the other, okay? Also means that I'll maintain oxygen to both places. So my head's always going to get super good oxygen, right? Because I have a separate set going there. Okay, and whatever kind of stuff is going to go to the bottom half of my body is also going to get really good oxygen, right? Particularly if we think about organs. Okay, my kidneys need good oxygen, right? My stomach and intestines need good oxygen. So they're getting their own separate supply as well. Okay, so again, ultra efficient. Right? And this allows for some land organisms not only to defeat gravity, so to speak, but to get much larger. Cody, did I happen to hit your question, or did you have another one?
I was just wondering, I don't know if you mentioned it, but like the closed circulatory system, like how did the blood become oxygenated there?
Wait.
Like for the one before that you're talking about, the one loop, how does the blood?
Oh, in the previous picture?
Yeah.
Whoops, that's not helping, is it? Right. So the lungs would also be here. I'm just not showing them in the photo. Yeah. So this photo is oversimplified in order to just show us the vessels. There would also be, in this case, the lungs here. That's a good question. So you're correct in that I did not mention that on the previous slide. Okay, other questions? I know what I'm forgetting. I think I've never run a class before. I keep forgetting the soccer. About our circulation or how it's pairing, excuse me, with respiration. So I have a rap video actually up. I think it's called Pump Your Blood. I think it might be the week past. Double check where I have that. But yes, believe it or not, yes. We'll double check I have it in a good place. You're just looking for the pathway of the heart, right?
I just feel like if I saw it moving, then it might like make more.
Absolutely, yeah. I will double check. I have it up there in an accessible place. I'll make sure it's under this week so it's easier to find.
Right, thank you.
No problem. Okay, anything else about heart pathways? What the goal is, right, that we're getting out of them? Okay, let's lightly start talking about sensory systems, right? This is always one of a core feature of our discussions. And it was one of our major ones when we talked about water too, right? So remember when we were talking about life in the water, sensory systems was a big conversation, right? Because many of our senses work significantly different in the water than they do in the air. So let's start with one of the ones that we know is problematic, right? So when we talk about vision, remember, okay, We said that vision in fishes was significantly different than it was in land animals. And the large piece behind that was because of the different functionality between the cornea and the lens. Right? So remember, fishes didn't use their cornea for much because cornea refracts light, right, or bends and focuses. Remember, this is what we know this word means. To bend and focus light. Okay, the cornea bends and focuses light the same way that water does. So it's pretty much useless to water organisms, right? So our fishes used a really wide lens. Well, now that we're on land, we don't have that problem, right? So instead, our cornea, right, that clear layer on the outside of our eye is going to do most of our work. Okay, we still have a lens, okay, and that is still doing some work, but it's doing very little of it. Okay, and this is a little easier for us to remember. Okay, we know that we can go out if we have glasses or contacts, right? LASIK is a thing, right? That's a surgery. You can go out and get laser eye surgery, and it can correct your vision, right? The key there is they're using that laser to reshape your cornea, right? So it's going to reshape the cornea, and the key is that shape, right? Your eye is basically just an eyepiece, right, like a lens. And so that's going to do better light refraction then on its own. And when you wear glasses or contacts, that's basically adding another layer of light refraction for you. Okay. Our lens then acts as like support staff. It's largely just doing last minute tweaks. This is also why our vision tends to get worse as we get older, right? Your lens, which is supposed to do the last minute tweaks for us, is a very flexible part of your eye, but it gets crappier and crappier the older we get, right? It gets less and less flexible. And so as it loses its flexibility, our eyes get worse at being able to bend and focus light, which is why we end up getting things like glasses, right, to add that extra layer of focusing, right, to take over what the lens stops being able to do for us. Okay, let's go ahead and stop here. Take me more than a hot second to go through the parts of the ear. Go. All right, I've got your exit ticket up. Now that we're all obscenely keenly aware of both our lungs and our eyeballs today, hey, my last two rows, when you have completed your Socrative, you're welcome to go. Please have a wonderful afternoon and stay dry. I think it's only supposed to rain until about midday, so.
Thank you, Dr. Arnett. Have a great day.
You too.